Dungeons & Dragons players and dungeon masters of Reddit. What is your best, okay, I'll allow it, story? We found a ruined palace in the jungle and ended up killing the queen who lived there. She was a Gorgon Medusa, so it was a hard fight, and we were looking forward to looting her place when we won. But since all the valuables were corroded or stolen long ago, there was no actual treasure to be had. "Over her dead body," I said, and cut her head off and kept it as a trophy. Fast forward to when we're running through a ruined city with a giant frog behemoth stomping after us. Well, I was playing a necromancer cleric, and after getting the DM to allow it, pulled the Gorgon's head out of my pack, held it toward the Titan, and resurrected it with all the unholy power I could muster. It blasted out a ray of petrification like a perfect reenactment of Perseus saving Andromeda, and blistered its flesh to stone through several rounds of sustained casting. The head was deteriorated to useless shreds after channeling so much energy, but the frog behemoth was defeated, and it was such an epic moment. My party was going up against a Medusa who had already petrified our paladin. Our barbarian had an idea. He covered himself with some old armor that had belonged to the Medusa's long-dead husband. Barbarian barges in, booming, "I have possessed this mortal body, my love!" Our dungeon master said she would allow it with a high enough persuasion check. Alas, our barbarian has cursed dice. In a game of Call of Cthulhu, think D&D but Lovecraftian and set in the real world in the 1920s, players were hunting down a wizard who had switched bodies with a college student and was now going around town killing the descendants of those who originally imprisoned him. The adventure is called The Condemned for any fellow keepers. He had managed to steal a book from the wizard's lair and leave a message to meet them at a nearby airfield to negotiate terms to trade the book for giving the student's body back. The investigators intended to betray him, however, and capture him with the help of the local PD. Little did they know the wizard was planning a surprise for them. They have a day or so to get ready for the meeting, so one of my players, who was a former Great War fighter pilot, asked if he could call his mechanic to prep up his plane and fly it down to Arkham, the town they were in. The player had rolled pretty well on his credit rating skill, which determines affluence, so I figured it wasn't unreasonable for him to have maybe owned the plane he used in the war, or bought it afterwards. He then says, "Oh, and Frank, go ahead and mount up the Browning while you're at it. I got a bad feeling about this meat." That's when the player and the rest of the table gives me the look that says, is he going to go along with it? I decided that, yes, your character does have a machine gun mounted to his plane. I'll even throw in a few crates of ammo to boot. The reason I allowed it was because the wizard had a spell called Summon, Bind, Hunting Horror that I really wanted to use on my players, but felt it was a little too unfair. Followed was a glorious battle that was by far one of my favorite times running a game. Motorcycle chase, a player being swallowed whole, wearing a ring granting immunity to kinetic damage in exchange for her sanity, with the intent of shooting it from the inside, a dogfight between an airplane and basically a dragon, with the cherry on top being the pilot catching the swallowed player on the wing of his plane after banishing the horror back to its plane of existence. What a fucking evening. Later on, they just ended up shooting the wizard in the back with both barrels of a sawed-off shotgun. As a dungeon master, players were playing in a world that was strictly controlled by an inquisitorial-like government. Magic was outlaw. Player insisted on playing a wizard. I warned him that there are strict penalties for magic use, but with a little role-playing, he can convince the people that it's all divine miracles and whatnot. He does well for a while, keeping up the ruse. A big giant battle comes, and it's winding downish as are confronting the uprising of the downcast magic-using and magical creatures and defending the city. But the party's wizard slips and casts not Holy Bolt, not Divine Judgment, not Miracle Spear, but Magic Missile, killing the leader of uprising. However, this did not sit well with their paladin. He says, "I attack the evil wizard." But the wizard is dead. Oh shit. Paladin, nat 20, me. Roll damage, I guess. I'm both a D&D player and dungeon master, so I'll tell my favorite one when I was a player in this story. TLDR, our bard makes an Archdevil his sugar daddy and kills almost everyone as they rule over everything. Some friends and I were playing in a friend's campaign. We were fighting the Archdevils and demons. There were 8 of us with the party looking like a rogue, 2 clerics, 1 life and me as a war cleric, 3 wizards, necromancy, evocation, and divination, followed with a bard and a tempest barbarian. We were all level 18 and were getting close to the big bad evil guy Asmodeus. The way he had it working was that we had to defeat all other archdevils that rule over 1 layer of hell to get to Asmodeus, who was on the last level. So we were in the 5th layer when the ruler, Levistus, appeared and attacked us. We were losing the fight because he kept on summoning many weaker devils. The bard, though, knows that he killed Asmodeus' wife out of passion. The rogue tries to, in the middle of the battle, convince Levistus to help us kill Asmodeus so he can revive the woman he killed. The rogue failed. Then the bard did what bards always do. He tried to make Levistus his sugar daddy. Succeeded due to some items and a few good rolls, to which the dungeon master says, "Well, this is your guys' last session for the campaign, and those were the best rolls for the night so far, so I will allow it, and you can't do it again." Now we have a ruler of hell as our bard's sugar daddy. When we finally reach Asmodeus, our bard gets Levistus, who was imprisoned by Asmodeus, to fight him for the death of his love. Levistus obviously dies, and a weakened Asmodeus gets killed, as well as our divination wizard and barbarian. Cleric, who's now level 20, starts reviving our dead teammates when the bard asks if he can revive Levistus, to which the cleric agrees. After Levistus is arrived, he kills all but the bard, and they proceed to attack the material plane and rule it. Shadowrun player got himself extra character points by taking the flaw where he had traumatic flashbacks triggered by chocolate éclairs flying through the air. His reasoning was that this would be so unlikely to happen, the flaw was 3 points. Probably having a bit of fun with it and not seriously power gaming, but he got me as a game master. So we were fighting a lich at the end of the campaign. We were 9 incredibly overpowered experienced players who min-maxed the hell out of their characters. So the DM decided to make this mean as possible. He gave the lich a sphere of annihilation. For those of you who do not know, if you are touched by the sphere, you instantly cease to exist. There's no saving throw or roll. If it enters your space, you cease to exist. You don't die, you cease to exist, so no resurrection. So the lich killed 6 of us in a handful of turns. That was when the fighter and the rogue turned to each other and said, "We are going to sacrifice ourselves by grappling it and pushing the lich into the sphere of annihilation." So they grappled him, liches have terrible strength, and then suplexed him into the sphere. Dungeon Master reads the sphere's item description and realized it's only a few feet in diameter, so they both made their saving throws, and survived. My group was adventuring in a crypt and came across some ritual oil. We took it, thinking we may need to create some kind of explosion to clear the way ahead. The barbarian, with 18 strength, was the one carrying it, even put some rope into them to make them like giant Molotov cocktails. We get down a little further into the crypt and find a coffin sealed with a heavy stone top. Barbarian puts the oil down to push the top off and unsurprisingly gets jumped by a vampire. Barbarian rolled poorly on initiative, but one of the other team members used their round to ignite the rope. Cue the light bulb for the barbarian. His turn finally comes around. He grapples the vampire, which is a feat in and of itself, and suplexes him directly into the urn. Lots of fire damage for both of them. My friend wanted to lick the floor for research purposes as a barbarian. The dungeon master said sure, why the fuck not roll for insight, and he got a nat 20. Apparently, that nat 20 allowed him to notice the 3 monsters that were about 120-ish feet in front of us. By the way, it was in a cave. So I was at an anime convention and they were playing live-action D&D. It's D&D, but you essentially act out on a large space and roll a large dice. There was a Tuxedo Mask cosplayer on stage and he said, "I will say some words of encouragement and disappear." And the dungeon master was just like, "Roll, I guess?" And he rolled and got a nat 20. Everyone was baffled. We were playing a 4-year-long campaign where the Undercity was trying to take over the surface realm. Our rogue, who was leading the group, strapped on every magic item he had at his disposal, gave the cleric a kiss, and stepped through his portable gateway to the Undercity. He had a few scrolls of haste and a cursed object that would cause all items to explode if exposed to haste. He planned it for months and turned himself into a huge magic bomb, destroying the whole Undercity. The party was in the dungeons of a castle, and the dungeons were full of wraiths that we needed to kill because they would drop magic skulls needed to complete a puzzle. Something we didn't realize until later. The rogue had a bag of devouring in his possession. He held it open, grabbed one of the wraiths, and forced it into the bag. The dungeon master eloquently describes the occurrence as a screeching, followed by a crunching sound coming from the bag. Fast forward to when we actually need these skulls. He is struggling hard trying to figure out this puzzle. We tried everything up to and including smashing the skulls, which the dungeon master says are indestructible. The dungeon master finally hints that we're missing a skull. We realize that it was going to be the skull dropped by the wraith that was shoved in the bag. We crack open the D&D manuals and read up on the bags they're devouring, and the dungeon master reads aloud that any creature that ends its turn inside the bag is devoured and all traces of it are consumed. We respond with, "But you said the skulls were indestructible." Dungeon master pauses a moment and says, The skull falls out of the bag, and we cheer in triumph. The party was in a theater, so they didn't have their weapons. We're looking for someone infected by a heart shard of fear. Eventually, they found it. A battle ensued. The Goliath barbarian said he'll pick up a couch from the set and smash it into the enemy. I've always been fond of rule of cool, Dungeon Master, so I said fuck it, sure. He rolled high, so I allowed the couch to deal 2d10 damage. It also broke to pieces in the process. The time when the barbarian smashed a couch into a wraith is still one of the high moments of that campaign. My group and I always loved to go to town. That was basically code words that we didn't want to participate in the storyline and instead liked to rile up as much shit in town as we could. It was a surefire way we could make our Dungeon Master essentially flex his freestyle abilities. He used to come up with the funniest shit when he wasn't following any sort of guide. We'd start total shit in our shops, or do our best to coerce the local population into the bedroom. Basically burn the place to the ground before we moved on. All in all, when we'd wrap up a dungeon, our Dungeon Master would wince when he asked, "What do you guys want to do?" And we'd answer, "Go to town!" Well, this isn't a D&D story, but I'm a Dungeon Master and a Game Master of a lot of games. I ran a one-shot of a game called Far Flung. Far Flung is a space opera powered by the Apocalypse rules. Basically, it means that most rolls are 2d6 with modifiers, and a 6 or lower is a fail, a 7 to 9 is a partial success, and a 10 plus is a full success. Rules light, fiction first and storytelling focused. Far Flung has some particularly wacky moves you can do, and gives players a lot of power to affect the narrative in interesting ways. My players were infiltrating a space casino, trying to save a sentient jellyfish from captivity and reunite it with its girlfriend. The players found themselves in a bind when the casino's wealthy boss trapped them in one of the rooms and sent a death squad of super soldiers to kill them. Things were looking pretty grim, and the players were going to have to fight their way out. That is, until my friend, who was playing the Immortal Playbook, went, "Oh wait, I just remembered. I own controlling stock in your company." See, the Immortal Playbook has a neat ability that allows them to establish connections, a resource, at will, with the justification being, you have lived so long and done so much that you have little connections everywhere you've forgotten about. It was such a deliciously amusing solution to this problem that I had to say okay to it. My friend rolled really well, and suddenly the red carpet was rolled out for these very important stakeholders. The perfect ending to this one-shot, and that remains one of my favorite games tales. My players were just starting their adventure, so they were maybe level 2 at most when this happened. We're doing a dungeon I had designed to be revisited many times in the story, and as usual, these idiots unintentionally got into one of the much more dangerous high-level areas I had planned for months down the road. There's a huge underground lake inside this dungeon with something nasty, and completely optional in its depths. They spend like a week in-game on one little shore near the lake, camping and preparing and planning. One of the two fighters had taken mostly crafting skills and ends up building a boat, while the other, much more reckless fighter is climbing cave walls like a lunatic trying to do God knows what. The druid starts filling the boat with any kind of poison and flammable he can get his hands on, and they send it out to the middle of this lake. The sorcerer lights it on fire, and the batshit fighter is at the top of the cave knocking down stalactites. Long story short, these assholes killed a goddamn 6,000 hit point Kraken with a flaming poisonous boat. At level 2. As a dungeon master, I go for a lot of, if you can make it make sense. But my best story involves a flame elemental with no perception. He was looking for a strumpet, and was leaving the game that night. Thought he saw one, decided to take a running leap, rolled a 1, and fell in a giant well. Was instantly extinguished. Not actually D&D, but a D&D-esque game called Shadowrun. I was creating my character, and I noticed that if I gave myself both a weak immune system and a strong immune system, I could give myself another skill point to spend later on and end up with a normal immune system. The Dungeon Master allowed it, and I was the only one to notice that little loophole.